so here's a little bit of test knitting that I've done earlier. So again, this is a finer yarn on bigger needles, but mostly so you can see the stitches a bit more clearly, but it is a bit holy. And what you'll see at the back, look, I've got all these ends hanging out, and this is it's a very scrappy piece of knitting. Look how many times the moths had eaten my yarn, and I had to rejoin in the middle of the row. But what I'm going to do is show you how to do this rejoining in the middle of the row, because I think you'll agree that you can't really see it there, can you? It's all just like, there's a great bit of knitting, and you can't see where it's joined. You can't. So I'm going to show you how to do that, and then we'll sew in the ends afterwards. So what I thought I'd do is show you how to do it with a different colour yarn, just so that you can see how it works. But this technique, let's be clear, is for joining the same coloured yarn. If you were doing Fair Isle or Intarsia or some other technique where you wanted to do colour work and you were pulling in different stitches of different colours, this doesn't work for that. This is not the technique for that. This is purely about joining the same coloured yarn, but I'm going to use two colours just so that you can clearly see when I'm using the old yarn and when I'm using the new yarn. So it's actually easier to do this in the middle of the row, as in really don't get to the end. You just want to knit along until you get to that point where you suddenly go, oh my goodness, I haven't got enough yarn left. What will I do now? So you need enough yarn to do about 3 or 4 more stitches and enough tail to sew in. So, you know, this is fine, possibly a bit long. You could go a bit further. But anyway, so here we go. So here's a bit of blue yarn. So I'm going to join it on. And remember, we're pretending this. We would normally do this with the same colour yarn. So I'm putting those two colours together. So I'm leaving the tail at the back, and I'm going to hold together my remaining pink yarn and the new blue yarn together. And what I'm doing now is I'm going to knit, oops, come here. Sorry, I'm knitting on long needles. I don't usually knit on these long needles. They're a little bit clumsy. So I'm going to knit 3 stitches together, can you see, with 2 threads on each stitch. So I've got a pink and a blue and a pink and a blue and a pink and a blue. And then I'm going to drop the old pink yarn, which is my old yarn, and carry on in the blue. So this would be the new yarn. So what you have is a double stitch halfway through your row. So we just knit that to the end of the row now.
3 double stitches.
3 double stitches, yes. So you can see them quite clearly there. You see? So what we're going to do is we're going to turn around, and we're going to work, and this of course works in the pattern. You just work your normal pattern. You can do this from a purl side and then knit back. It doesn't really matter. You would leave the tails at the back of your work, so whatever you deem to be the wrong side, that's the side you leave the tails, but it doesn't matter which side you're working. And then you get to the point where you've got the double stitches, and here you just work them together. So you just pretend they're one stitch and you work those 3 stitches together, and then you continue to the end of the line. And knit the last stitch. And then what we've got here, you'll see that it's slightly bunched up there. So what you often have to do is just give a little tug to those 2 ends, that's all. And then turn that round. Look, perfect join. Now, of course, you've got 2 colours going on, so it doesn't look quite as neat as it does when you've got the same colour. As you can see down here, it's just pretty much invisible. You can't see that at all. But that very neatly joins in to your 2 yarns together in the middle of the row. It doesn't add any extra bulk to your knitting, and Jo and I were talking about this earlier, and she said, would you need to go splicing your yarn, which is where you split it and then join the 2 bits, and that theoretically doesn't add any extra bulk. And I said, to be honest, I've never really needed to, only when I had some really thick yarn, which I was knitting on like 10mm needles. I mean, it was huge fat yarn, and then it did get too thick to double up in the middle, and I did have to splice that. But other than that, I never bother with splicing. I simply just knit together, and this double stitches, you can't see them, you can't feel them, they really are completely fine. So that's how I do it, and I would recommend this method. It's nice and easy. And then, of course, it does leave you with ends to sew in. I'm afraid we haven't resolved the end situation completely. We sort of partly resolved it because what you have got here is actually a very secure piece of knitting. Now, for instance, if I had a loose end on the edge, when I sew it in, I would want to sew it in one way and then turn it around and sew it back the other way to make it really secure. But these ends actually are pretty secure anyway. Not secure enough that I would cut them off close now. That would then work its way through and probably end up poking out the front of your garment or whatever it is. But all you really need to do is just take it through the back here. Do you know what I've realised, Jo? I haven't got my glasses on and I can't actually see what I'm doing. That's probably why I'm all cack-handed.
You're doing well.
So yeah, just if I'm about to chop something I shouldn't, just yell at me, stop! So that is now sewn in, this one. I'm going to cut it off because otherwise I'll forget which ones I've sewn in. There you go. And that now is completely secure and it's all disappeared. So I'm going to show you that sewing in again.
So actually that does minimise the amount of sewing in.
It slightly does, yes, because, yeah, so I'll show you what I would do. So when you pick it up, what you want to do is just choose a stitch that's close by, and then you're just picking up some little loops.
In a diagonal.
Yeah, well, that's kind of where the stitches run, really, is in a diagonal fashion. And you pull that through. And that's enough for an end that's been joined in this way. But if you'd actually, you were doing intarsia or something, or is on the edge, you'd probably want to just turn it round and then go back through the stitches again. And this makes it really secure. That is never going to pull out. You are not going to have a problem with those ends creeping out. And of course, ends coming undone in the middle of your knitting is a kind of problem because it means your whole garment can just fall apart, which is pretty serious. No, it's not good. No, it's not good. No, none of us really ever want to do that. So that's how I sew in my ends.
You've got Kath Pritchard saying, looking good, looking good, and rabbits.
And rabbits, yeah. And the daffodils. We've seen the daffs, Kath.
I'm sure she'll appreciate the daffs.
Yeah, she will. Yeah.
Nikki's garden.
Pritchard. That sounds a slightly Welsh name. I reckon you might be from the valleys, Kath. So here we go. So you just sew in a little bit diagonally. Now, to make them slightly less painful, what I do quite often do is, particularly if I'm working a big piece, I do try and do my ends every so often. When I've got a few, I'll go and sew them all up so that I don't end up the end of a really big piece with like 100 ends to do, because that is demoralising, let's face it. We all just want to get on. Look, now this is what I've done. I haven't left enough tail here.
Oh dear.
Can't get my needle back in again. So this is how I do this if that happens. So I'm going to put my needle in. I just put the needle through. Oops, let's pick that up. There. And then what I do is, just holding that through, I go back and now thread the needle at this point. Well, I'm doing remarkably well actually without my glasses, because I really can't see what I'm doing. And then I pull that through. Can you see? So that's the way to get around not having enough yarn tail to actually go through with your needle, which sometimes I forget to do. It happens. So there we go. That's yes, joining your yarn in the middle of the row and sewing in some ends. And look, you see, can't see the joins, can't see the ends. All looks fab.
Beautiful.
I know, I am.
Thank you, Nikki.
You're very, very welcome.